Good afternoon. My name is Zach Horowitz. I'm a graduate student in civil engineering at Portland State. Welcome to...
You have to hold it down. Okay.
Welcome to Portland State's Friday afternoon seminar series sponsored by the Center for Transportation Studies. Today's speaker is Barry Horowitz, General Manager for Container Marketing at the Port of Portland. He's also my dad. I've heard thousands of his many lectures over the dinner tables over the years. He has a long history in the container business, both working for steamship carriers as well as large shippers such as Nike, which is why we moved up to Portland in the first place. He's also worked for 3PL firms and now is doing his stint at the port. So we wish everybody, wish Barry a warm welcome.
That's actually pretty cool to have your kid introduce you. That's never happened before. Actually, neither one of them have ever heard me do this before. Not in my business life, and I also taught classes at UCLA Extension for many years down in California, long before any of the boys. There are two other of these in this set. They live both in Toronto. Anyways, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. I'm very interested in this. I've been doing it for a long time, 35 years in fact, and as Zach mentioned, a lot of different elements. I've worked for a number of different steamship companies. I, as he said, came up to Portland in 1991 to become the International Transportation Director at Nike. I've worked for 3PLs. We were positioned in London, England for a couple of years doing this work in Europe where the environment's very different, and did a couple of years doing independent consulting, and I've been with the Port of Portland for 2 years now. So we thought that what we would do is to kind of put this in context, is to do most of the presentation about the port, about the activities of the port, which I've come to understand in the 7 months I've been there is not particularly well understood here in the local community. And then I'm going to try to tie those pieces together for you at the end so that you kind of understand how we work and what the ultimate goals of the port are, and to try to explain to you how all these pieces are connected. It is a very holistic and integrated system in which we're working, and I'm going to try to connect those pieces for you. So that's pretty much the agenda that we've got here. First of all, the Port of Portland was established, a charter of the state of Oregon in 1891, primarily to maintain a dredged shipping channel in the Columbia River. It didn't have a lot to do with cargo, although the dredging of the channel, the consistent keeping the channel open, was one of the primary reasons, because as an alternative to San Francisco, the Port of Portland has been serving cargo needs for over 100 years now. We now have 4 marine terminals. I'll show you some maps and show you how that works and what it looks like. The mission of an organization like Portland, by the way, this is my first experience in all those 35 years in a public agency. Having spent all the rest of the time in the private sector, there are some adjustments to be made to go from the private sector to the public sector. So enhancing the region's economy, quality of life by providing efficient cargo and air passenger access. That's an interesting one to national and global markets. The Port of Portland is one of only 5 ports in the United States that's considered a consolidated port. That means the Port Authority manages both the seaport and the airport. The other examples are Oakland, SeaTac, Seattle-Tacoma, up in Puget Sound, Boston, where the Port Authority has, again, Logan Airport and the Boston Seaport, and Port Elizabeth in New York. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey manage a couple of the airports, as well as the Port of New York and New Jersey. So those are the only ones, and it adds a significant layer of complexity to the work of the organization. This is what most people here in town think of when they think of the Port of Portland. This is Terminal 6, and you'll see some more slides later. It's the container facility at Terminal 6, but here on the west end we have the Hyundai car facility, and down here we have the Honda car facility. Not seen in this picture, but you'll see it later, is Toyota. But also not shown here is the fact that we're not just an import receiving for cars from Asia, but we receive large quantities of cars coming from domestic production in the Midwest of the U.S., and we'll get to that in just a bit.
Is that Columbia River?
Yes, this is the Columbia River right here. So here's the end of the Columbia River up here. This is, can't remember the name of the park. It's a park. And then around here, pardon?
Kelly Point.
That's the one, Kelly Point. and then it comes around here to the Willamette, and there's other but we're gonna blow this up and get farther and farther out so that you can see the whole thing. The area outlined in yellow is called Rivergate. It's the Port of Portland's industrial park. So here we have T6. This is what you just saw in that previous picture. This is Hayden Island. We come around here, the park, and then here we have Terminal 5 and Terminal 4, and here is the Willamette River coming down here. So this area in yellow is the Port of Portland's industrial park area called Rivergate. Lots of warehouses, some light manufacturing, a variety of different activities. Oregon Steel has steel, cold and hot rolling facility. In a small corner here of Terminal 6, we receive about 1 million tons a year, about 800,000 tons a year of steel slabs. These things are about 12 feet or 14 feet square, about 2 feet high. They weigh hundreds of tons each, and all that happens is they get flattened out and manufactured into pipe. That's what happens. It's part of what ports do. So now let's go bigger. So here's Terminal 6, here's Hayden Island, and here's Terminal 5 and Terminal 4. Swan Island, Terminal 2 down here. Here's our administrative offices of the port on 1st and Everett Street. Here's PDX. We also own and operate Troutdale Airport, Milano Airport, and Hillsborough Airport as well. And this also gives you an idea of the railroad facilities that we have. Both the Burlington Northern and the Union Pacific Railroad operate through the Port of Portland, which are the two Class 1 railroads here on the West Coast. By the way, please interrupt anytime you have questions. Just don't let me keep going on and on. Blowing it up even bigger, we have the Columbia and Snake River systems. We serve the upriver ports, Boardman, Umatilla, Pasco, and Lewiston, Idaho. It's about 700 miles from Portland to Lewiston, and yet Lewiston is a major source of cargo that flows down the Columbia River. We'll see some statistics in just a minute. Here you have an illustration of the barge system. The Columbia Snake system is a major barge system, probably exceeded in this country only by the Mississippi-Missouri system, obviously much larger. But nevertheless, a major gateway for the hinterland here in the Pacific Northwest. Let's recognize the fact that we're a pretty small population area. Oregon is about 3.5 million people. Washington, about 6 or 7 million people. We moved up here in 91 from the San Fernando Valley of LA that has 3.5 million people all by itself. So we're small large geographic area, small density population area, but huge resources in terms of agriculture in this entire inland area, and huge volumes of product, and you'll see in just a minute how huge come down the river. Yes, please.
Is the Snake River navigable? The barges go down
It is
there?
absolutely. It's navigable up to Lewiston, Idaho. Okay, this is what we did at the Port of Portland in 2005. 683 vessels. That's more than 50 ships a month. That's more than 10 ships a week. That's pretty busy. We're the #1 import receiving automobile port on the west coast of the United States. We handled just under 400,000 car units in 2005, about 380,000. We expect to exceed 400,000 units in 2006. That is made up here in Portland of Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai. It doesn't count Subaru, which has a facility across the river in Vancouver. We're the #3 grain exporting region in the world. And you'll see some tonnage statistics in a moment. And we're the #1 wheat exporting port in the United States. Having nothing whatsoever to do with the problems of Katrina in New Orleans, we were the #1 wheat exporting port in the United States before Katrina, and we're #1 after Katrina. Very large volumes. And we're the #1 mineral bulk port on the west coast of the U.S. Mineral bulk, for our purposes, consists primarily of two commodities: potash, which is nitrogen-based fertilizer raw material, which we actually receive, believe it or not, from Saskatchewan up in Canada. It comes south in unit trains from the Burlington Northern Railroad into Portland. And soda ash, which is used in a variety of different things, from glass making to as a component for some fertilizer, that we're receiving here, also in unit trains, in this case from Wyoming. We presently have two container services in Portland, one from Hanjin, which is a Korean company, the shipping lines these days, and we may or may not have a chance to talk about that today, are typically not operating independently. They have a tendency these days to work in what are called alliances, where a number of shipping lines combine their services to make the offering of service more efficient. In other words, if 3 or 4 or 5 shipping companies combine their vessels collectively, they can offer multiple strings, which they wouldn't be able to do if they simply operated themselves. And CP Ships had been an amalgamation of about 7 different shipping companies under the brand of CP Ships, but it included an Italian shipping company, a Mexican shipping line, and a number of others. They have recently been purchased by a German company called Hapag-Lloyd. They will continue for a time to operate as CP Ships. That service, Hanjin is trans-Pacific, goes between here and North Asia, and CP Ships offers 2 services to the Mediterranean through Panama Canal, one to the Mediterranean, to the Western Med, and one to North Europe. And like I mentioned earlier, both BNSF, Burlington Northern, and Union Pacific, the 2 Class 1 railroads here in the West, operate on dock. So here again some statistics on our automobiles. This number is a little bit light. We prepared the slide before we got our final statistics. So between 350, 380,000 units in 2005, again expected to go over 400,000 for next year. That trade is worth about $700 billion, those 350 or 400,000 cars. The numbers begin to be gigantic. We have an advantage because if you look at the map of the world, which I could have included here, what you discover is that Portland, from the point of view of a shipping company, is 1 day steaming time closer to Asia than Southern California is. Remember, the West Coast kind of angles down like this from northwest to southeast. Well, a day steaming time for today's ships, which cost from $80 to $120 million, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 to $50,000 every day. So it's 1 day closer coming in, it's 1 day closer going back. The shipping company can save lots of money. A lot of people are worried about our river, the Columbia. Can shipping companies efficiently and profitably make calls here? The answer is absolutely yes. You saw the numbers, over 600 ships last year. We do have a depth problem, however, in the Columbia. The channel depth in the Columbia averages actually about 60 feet, but in some places it's as low as 40 feet. In other places, it varies along the channel. Now you need to understand something. We're 106 miles from the Pacific Ocean here in Portland. The navigation channel in the Columbia is about 600 feet wide, although the river itself is much wider than that. So this channel deepening project that you perhaps have heard about is only focusing on this 600-foot wide channel, and only about 25% of the length of the river, of the total length of the river, actually needs to be deepened. And we're going from 40 feet down to 43 feet. We'll probably never have the opportunity to do that again, which means that there will be upward size limits of ships that can come into this river. It's not just a question of depth, which is the clearance of the vessel from the hull of the ship down to the bottom of the channel, but it's also a question of length. The biggest container ships that are being built today are over 1,100 feet long. There are curves in the river that would make that navigation very difficult, regardless of how deep the channel goes. It's also important to understand that, contrary to popular opinion, the bottom of the Columbia is not filled with a lot of gunk. The Columbia River bed is essentially a volcanic riverbed, and so it's mostly sand. In fact, we take it's terrible words we use in this business. It's called dredging spoils. It really sounds terrible. It's the dirt that we take up from the bottom, and it's really sand which we then sell, and it's used to make beaches, which people use all the time, completely unpolluted. The Willamette is a whole other story. We're not dredging the Willamette. So here are some statistics of what we've done in the grain and mineral bulks business here in Portland in 2005. So 2.4 million tons of potash through Terminal 5. 2.4 million tons. I mean, just think about that. It's a lot of stuff coming from Saskatchewan. Just over 2 million tons of soda ash from Wyoming. There are a number of grain terminals here in Portland, but you see 2004, we don't have the 2005 statistics, 13.5 million tons of wheat. The Port of Portland only handled about 2.5 million tons of wheat. There are a lot of private dock facilities along the river that handle the remaining 10 or 12 million tons. So we handle at the port about 2.5 million, but the river itself, well, I take that back, I'm sorry, Terminal 5, but it's not just wheat. 4 million tons through Terminal 4, the rest through these private facilities, other places on the river. And then break bulk cargo, as you see, those steel slabs. But we also handled about 500,000 tons of railroad track that are manufactured in places like China and Korea. And Terminal 2, in addition to that railroad track, also imports a lot of windmills for wind farms in the eastern part of the state for electricity generation. Container cargo in 1980, see only 17% of cargo moved in containers. Today it's over 60%. I would suggest that depending upon how you do the calculations, that it's probably closer to 80 or 90%, but again, it depends on how you measure it. Our trade through Portland worth about $3 billion. That's customs calculations. More than 1,000 different companies use it, and we'll see some statistics again. And again, because of our closeness to Asia, because of our infrastructure of both rail and highway, that's I-5 north and south and I-84 east and west, we can make a calculation that shippers using Portland in the local area or all the way back to the Midwest save north of $60 million a year by using Portland. And I don't know if you can read this down here, but this is some gross statistics about global container moves. In the course of a year, about 280 million TEUs. You're familiar with the TEU, FEU calculation? The standard size container is a 20-foot unit. It's 20 feet long by 8 feet wide by 8 feet high. We call that a TEU, a 20-foot equivalent unit. Those are those big steel boxes that you see on trucks when the freeways get all jammed up. We also call it an FEU, which is a 40-foot long container, same width, same height, but 40 feet long. So one FEU would be equal to 2 TEUs. So pretty simple calculation. In 2005, around 280 million units of 20-foot containers were moved around the world, filled with cargo. Another 80 million moves were empty containers that needed to be repositioned. It's a very complicated system of having to balance equipment. We import much more than we export, so those full containers come in full of cargo. We don't fill all the ones going back. A lot of those go empty. So out of 360 million, about 80 million units go empty at huge cost to the shipping companies. In the P&W, about 6 million. That's Portland, Seattle, and Tacoma, essentially, and about 160,000 here in Portland. So you see that we're really just a small part of the global movement of containerized cargo. And a lot of French fried potatoes coming out of here frozen from Idaho, going to a McDonald's store in Asia. Yes?
I actually have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Back up.
Yep.
How far below the surface does the average ship extend?
Well, it's one of those terrible things about averages, you know. I mean, a Taiwanese company called Yang Ming is bringing a new string of ships into Portland that will be only have room for 1,500 of these TEUs. Hanjin, who presently calls here, brings in ships that are called post-Panamax vessels. A post-Panamax vessel is a vessel that's too large to pass through the Panama Canal. Those ships hold about 5,500 20-foot units. As you can imagine, first of all, the size of the ship by itself, and then fully loaded with cargo, the depth requirement of those vessels is going to be vastly different. The car carriers that come in with those vehicles are like giant floating garages. They're very wide and very shallow depth at the bottom, so they don't draw much water at all. So the ships that come here anywhere from 20 feet of draft, that's the measurement, to just about touching the bottom in some of those bigger ships. So there's a huge variation. Please, go ahead.
My other question was
That's all right.
that port down by the steel bridge on the east side of the river, is that a part
That's
of the port?
not Portland.
Okay,
That's a private
one.
That's a private facility, right? That's the one that we see from our office every day. It's a grain facility. That's not part of the Port of Portland. Okay, here are some of our commodities. Footwear, not just for Nike, by the way. Everybody knows about Nike here in town, but you know we are the U.S. headquarters for Adidas. They don't bring much footwear here, but Doc Martens here in Portland, Lancer Footwear is here in Portland, a number of other companies. So about 10% of our volume is footwear. Tires, Les Schwab brings in lots of tires that go out to their big distribution center out in Prineville. Furniture, toys, apparel, and festives, things like Christmas decorations, a gigantic business. The total estimated eastbound market here in Portland is about 110,000 TEUs, relatively small volume of business here locally. And here you get some idea of the origin. No surprise, I think, that the majority is coming from China and Hong Kong. Okay? Now, the indirect and direct is the direct business is cargo that comes directly off ships into the Portland market, indirect would be cargo that typically would come off a ship in Seattle or Tacoma and be trucked down here to Portland. And here are some of the companies that are doing business directly here in town. Nike, of course, Rite Aid, Xerox, Bimart, Fred Meyer, Kroger. This was very interesting. When Kroger grocery stores back in Cincinnati bought Fred Meyer a few years ago, there was a lot of concern because Kroger is essentially a grocery chain, whereas Fred Meyer, in addition to groceries, has a lot of general merchandise, as you know from ever being in a Fred Meyer store. So there was a lot of concern that this international transportation function would be relocated back to the Midwest. In fact, just the opposite happened. A lot of Kroger stores around the country expanded into general merchandise, and the entire function and most of the distribution for that general merchandise remained here in town. Columbia Sportswear, they operate about a 600,000 or 700,000 square foot distribution center facility out in that Rivergate complex that I showed you. So here's our exports. Hay and animal feed, pretty interesting for most people. 34% of our volume. We're talking the hay that you see when you drive out into the country. You see those great big bales. That's exactly how it's shipped. We have lots of room to grow this stuff here, but our friends overseas do not. But they have lots of animals. The animals need to eat, and they would rather we grow the hay to feed their animals, and then they take up that valuable real estate for farming. So a lot of hay. Paper. We're not talking paper like this. We're talking about the paper that you stick in your yellow recycling baskets once a week. Collectively here in the United States, the largest single containerized export from the U.S. to overseas, and we're talking essentially Asia, is waste paper. Once again, same story. We have lots of forests here in North America. Asia has not very many forests left these days, and the recycled paper for both newspapers as well as for cardboard boxes is a big export. Frozen potato products and other agricultural products, including a category of items called pulses, which are grown out in eastern Oregon and western Idaho. Pulses consist of peas, beans, and lentils, which are that's the category, mostly in dried condition in bags shipped in containers. Forest products, this number has gone down dramatically over the last few years, and in fact, over the last couple of years, we have in fact become a net importer of forest products here in the P&W. Okay? We are bringing in lots of this kind of stuff, moldings and trimmings and so on, and that's coming mostly from large planted forests, replanted and reforested forests in places like Chile, and then a vast variety of other kinds of exported commodities. Okay, another list of onions and whey and all kinds of products. Nursery products, Christmas trees, a big export. Live Christmas trees are exported from Portland, mostly to Europe, a bit to Asia, in reefer containers. I always hesitate in front of a group of university people to talk about reefers, but we're talking about refrigerated containers, folks. The ratio between our exports to our imports, when I first arrived in Portland, from working for a shipping line in Los Angeles, coming here to visit Nike, which was in the mid-'80s, our ratio was 1 import container for every 7 export containers. That put Portland at a huge competitive disadvantage from the point of view of the shipping lines. This balancing that I mentioned earlier, that meant for every container that we imported, 6 additional empty containers had to be found someplace to get them here for the region's exporters to fill those empty containers up with cargo. Today, it's only 1 to 3. It means that the shipping lines only have to reposition 2 containers for every one they import, which makes that balance makes us a much more, in relative terms, attractive place. Container cargo trends, it's only going to get bigger. Just to give you some numbers, Southern California in 2005 handled somewhere between, that's LA and Long Beach together, something like 14 million containers in 2004. We did 150,000, yes.
I have a question. How does
Sure.
container
Push your
shipping-
button. You need to push your button. How am I doing, Jen?
How does container shipping compare to barging?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Like I was working on a project for supplying a bunch of pavement to the Port of Oakland.
Yep.
And our manufacturing facility is right off of 84 here in Portland.
Yep.
And it was really expensive for us to barge it, and we can even get barges to ship.
Barge from where to where?
From Port of Portland to the Port of Oakland.
Okay.
And trucking was really expensive, and rail was just out of there. So I was kind of curious on how container
Barging in this country is used in 2 instances. One is up and down rivers and for intercoastal trade, which would be down the river, out through the mouth of the river at Astoria and down to Southern California. there are some limits as to how far that can go, because once you take a barge out of a river and onto the ocean, it's a whole other engineering issue because of the different requirements of construction of the vessel that's carrying the containers. You do not see containers going on barges across the ocean. It's just not practical because of the requirement for size. You'd have to build an extraordinary large barge, and that just wouldn't actually work on the high seas. And so across oceans, we're talking about containers on ships as opposed to containers on barges.
Yeah, I'm more referring to like if we were able to ship by container on a ship going down to Oakland versus...
Well, now we have another kind of a problem. We have now a regulatory problem. In this country, we have something called the Jones Act. The Jones Act in the United States governs something that is called international shipping cabotage. Very old French word that means intercoastal trade. Trade within the boundaries of a country from one port in that country to another port. In the United States, we're one of the few countries in the world left that has this rule. You cannot, unless the flag of the vessel is American, unless the vessel was built in this country, and unless the crew is entirely made up of Americans, you cannot take cargo, say, from Portland to Oakland, unless the ship meets those requirements. So a foreign flag vessel is not allowed to do that. There are almost no ships that meet those requirements. Therefore, that type of trade by vessel is almost non-existent. In fact, we have this problem with Katrina. In order to bring aid to New Orleans, there was talk of waiving the cabotage rule, the Jones Act rules, to make relief efforts to New Orleans easier. Only very limited was allowed. The unions and the barging interests on the Mississippi River wouldn't allow the government to pass a waiver, so it didn't happen. It's a very complicated issue. By all means, if you have other questions, please give me a call. It could take us 3 days to talk about all the details of that. Two sources of growth. Local and LA, 15 million in 2004. Expectations are by 2020 that number is going to go up to 36 million. Nobody actually can tell you where they're all going to go. Nobody can actually tell you how they're going to pass through LA. If you've ever driven in LA, you know what the congestion is like. The 710 freeway, which connects Long Beach to the rest of Southern California, is already jammed. They've built something called the Alameda Corridor. It already costs $75 for a container to go there. And then they have to be processed in downtown LA in the rail yard to go to the rest of the country. The numbers are probably right, but no one quite knows what it's going to look like to try to squeeze 35 million containers through there. Yes, ma'am.
This is kind of backing up.
That's okay.
You mentioned
You
that
like
the CP shipping that goes
Yes.
to Europe, but on your charts
Yes.
in neither export or import, did you show any percentage?
The commodities are about the same. The commodities are very much the same between here
Okay,
and
but
Europe.
what's the percentage that goes to Europe?
Oh, what's the percentage between Europe and Asia? Probably Asia accounts for about 80% of the trade here, and Europe 20% of those two shipping companies. Yeah. Channel deepening is going to help us. It's going to allow larger ships to come up the river. It's going to create consistency, at least in service. We're a small market on the import side. The import leg of this journey, regardless of where the ships are coming from and going to, is much more attractive to the shipping companies because the rates that they receive from their customers are much higher. A lot of different elements of that calculation, but it has as much as anything to do with the value of the merchandise. Clearly, a container of Nike shoes or a container of television sets is going to be more valuable and therefore be able to absorb more money in freight than a container of hay cubes or of dried peas going to China. Go ahead. Was that a question, or you just...
Being with the expansion of the port of Prince Rupert, since it's a real deep water port, is that going to affect the port of
Great
Portland?
question. Well, we can talk about Prince Rupert up in Canada, and we can talk about another place called Lázaro Cárdenas down in Mexico. The answer is an absolute definite maybe. Here are the problems. Lázaro Cárdenas, if you think Portland is a small market, there's only, in Prince Rupert, about 5,000 people living there. It is a deep water port, but it's 500 miles north of Vancouver. Vancouver is not an effective gateway in general for cargo coming into the United States. Remember that California has more people than Canada does. So Prince Rupert as an alternative might work for some Canadian cargo. It's not likely in the short term to work for cargo coming to U.S. destinations. It's very far from Vancouver, 500 miles. It's 500 miles still farther to places like Chicago, which might be potential alternatives. Lázaro Cárdenas in Mexico is 1,000 miles south of the U.S.-Mexico border. It might work as an outlet valve for Southern California's congestion, but not for cargo destined to California. It might work for cargo destined to the West Coast that is on its way to Texas, for example. There's a lot of questions as to whether that's going to work. The railroads are not yet built in either place. Yes, sir. Well,
I was just wondering if we had an Alameda corridor that reduced the, let's say, rail congestion or rail travel time through Portland, would that play into our ability to attract more traffic?
that raises another really interesting question. Let me just go back to this map right here. We actually, right now in Portland, have the best ocean to rail connection on the west coast of the United States. We don't actually have to do anything. We just have to do a better job of letting the marketplace, which is the United States market, know that that exists. And if we go back two more, you'll see it right here. This is our rail yard here on T6, right here. These are containers that are double stacked on rail cars. And here's the track. Here's the track. And here's the track. So here's the situation. In LA and Long Beach, containers come off ships, and every terminal in Southern California has on-dock rail. Railroad tracks on the container facility where containers can come off ships, go on the rail cars, and begin their journey. But in California, they have to go from LA or Long Beach up to downtown central LA to the railroad marshaling yard for those transcontinental trains to be built. Built because they're about 2 miles long. Each train has about 250 or so container units. There's a charge to the shipper of $75 a container in order to do that Alameda corridor, and it takes a day, and then the train has to be built, so there are some delays. And then the rail links between Southern California and the rest of the country tend to be very congested. That's Southern California. In Puget Sound, we have another interesting situation. There are 2 tracks between Seattle and Tacoma and connecting it to the Midwest. And I never remember which is the northern and this is the southern one, but one is called Stampede Pass and one is called Stevens Pass. They both have tracks, but they both have a problem. They have similar problems. Problem number 1 is they have steep grades. Steep grades mean the railroads have to add additional power engines. That costs a lot of money. Second, they have to pass through tunnels. That's a problem because it slows down the movement of those trains. And after a train passes, another train has to wait because the tunnel has to be vented from the exhaust gases from the train before the next train can come through. Third, it's typically single track. That means one track going in one track that serves both directions. So the train coming west has to wait for the train going east to pass before it can go through the tunnel. And finally, those tunnels are not high enough for double stack, so it's only one container high. That's for both of those passes through the mountains in Washington. So typically what happens, containers come in through Puget Sound, very efficient terminals. Most of them have on-dock rail, but the trains with double stack, 2 containers high, efficient service, speedy service to the Midwest, those trains come south to Portland, and then they go east. In every case, the express train from Puget Sound, Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, or Union Pacific comes through Portland. Why? Because on the north shore of the Columbia River is the Burlington Northern track river grade. Most of the way, just take a look the next time you drive through the gorge, 2 sets of tracks. Trains can go in both directions at the same time. Virtually no tunnels, and wherever there is a tunnel, they're high enough for those double-stack trains to go. Union Pacific, southern shore of the Columbia River, exactly the same situation. River grade, no additional engines required, double-stack trains, double track a good part of the way, no venting of tunnels and double-stack trains. So how come they get all the business and we don't? We'll get to that in just a minute. Okay. I want to keep you interested. Okay, so we're improving T6. That's our container facility. It has a capacity of about 500,000 containers as it's presently configured. We have the possibility to extend the dock another 600 to 800 feet, which would raise that to probably 600,000 or 700,000 containers. We have a new crane coming. It was built in China. It's going to be set up right down here. It's a post-Panamax crane. That means it's capable of handling these much larger ships. This is a very capital-intensive business. That crane costs about $7.5 million. It's actually on a ship. I wish I had brought this picture of it for you. Please let me know if you're interested. I'll send it to you on email. It's on a ship with 4 cranes that are loaded to be discharged up in Seattle, in the terminal in Seattle. We're a bit worried, actually, about our crane because of all the rain we've had. That means the river level is high, which as things stand right now, if the river doesn't go down between now and sort of late March, early April, when the crane is due, it will not be able to pass beneath the Longview Bridge. Stay tuned. We'll let you know what happens. Okay, so just some more pictures so that you get a sense of the activities. Here's Terminal 6 again. You've always seen it. Honda here in the east, Hyundai here in the west. If we move the car companies out, we could probably handle 2 million containers at T6. Okay, should we do that? I don't know. Should we not do containers and do more cars? Because we could get rid of this and probably do 2 million cars. Lots of issues facing us. These are the things we talk about in the endless meetings that my kids hear me complain about every night at dinner. Here's the Toyota facility that you can see when you pass over the thank you very much, the St. John Bridge. Here's Kinder Morgan, who operates the mineral bulk facility for us at Terminal 4. Here's Terminal 5. This is an amazing place. This is the largest wooden building on the west coast of the United States. It is an astounding thing to see. It's where this potash is kept. This place, again, handles a couple million tons a year. Circular track. The trains come in from Saskatchewan. You can see them here. They go around. They discharge the stuff either to the storage or to the ship, and out they go and back to Saskatchewan to get more. We're going to increase the capacity of this place by about 50% over the next 2 years. Terminal 2. This is where we take off that railroad track. No trains, just railroad track and the windmills there on Terminal 2. And I think that's it, but I brought 2 more. No, here's some of the advantages of Portland. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to zip through this. It's kind of a marketing slide. It tells you why Portland is better than some other places. But I just added this morning 2 other slides that I thought you might find interesting. This was the ad that the Port of Portland used in 2004 and 2005 to try to attract shipping companies to come here. Now, let me preface this by saying there's no shipping company who sees an ad and says, oh, my God, I can't believe we've been too stupid to bring ships to Portland. It doesn't work that way. Why not? You see an ad for shoes that you like, you go out and buy them. Why not? Well, because in order to have an efficient service to a port to attract cargo, you need to have a service that comes to the port every week on the same day. That means between here and Asia, let's say China, you need 4 or 5 vessels. Well, I just got done telling you that those ships cost probably a minimum of, even small ones, around $50 million. The big ones, up to $100 million or more. So if we have 4 of them, we're talking probably an investment of somewhere between $300 and $400 million. That's just ships. That doesn't count fuel. That doesn't count containers. A container today, and today's prices, for a 40-foot container, for a 20-foot container, about $2,000. For a 40-foot container, about $2,500. Well, it's not enough to have 1 container for every slot on that ship. You need about 5. 1 that's on the ship, 1 that's out with cargo at the origin, 1 that's out with cargo at the destination, and 1 that's sitting empty on each end. So you need about 5 containers for each slot on every ship. So if you have a ship with 5,000 slots, and each slot costs $2,000 for a container, you guys can do the arithmetic probably faster than I can. 5,000 times 2,000 times 5. We're looking at an investment of somewhere in the vicinity of $500 million for a relatively small service. Do you think that a company is going to look at an ad in a magazine and say, oh, well, I think we need to go spend $500 million. Let's get started in Portland next week. You also don't necessarily have ships. Now, Seattle and Tacoma were terribly congested. Southern California was even more badly congested. We figured that because Portland wasn't congested, that would automatically force shipping companies to bring their vessels here. And we were absolutely wrong. Because remember what I said at the very beginning. This is a very complicated business. There are a lot of different elements. Because other things were happening at the same time as this huge boom of cargo coming, mostly from China, occurred. The cost of ships went up. The cost of building containers went up. Why? Because the cost of steel went up. Was there a shortage of steel? Well, it depends on how you define that. There was actually no shortage of steel. The question is, where was the steel that was being made going? Well, it was going to China, where most of all the containers are made, But the Chinese made a decision that it was more profitable to build buildings and cars than it was to build containers. So they stopped building containers. That meant that there was now a shortage of containers, so the steamship companies need to recycle their containers more quickly, recirculate them more quickly. Okay? That meant that they were going to bring their ships to a place that was heavily favored by import cargo. Southern California and Puget Sound, the bigger markets, where they could empty the containers, get them back on the ships to the Far East much more quickly. Here, we have a small market. There wasn't enough local cargo. Importers were located in the interior. Exports, which are less in value and which produce less in freight, was not attractive for them. So it didn't matter that we weren't congested. Under no circumstances were they likely to bring ships here. In addition, even if ships had been available, they wouldn't have come, but ships weren't available because they were all tied up down there and up there. The price for chartering vessels, for renting them, shipping lines own about half of their containers and charter about half of their vessels, went up at the same time. So the cost elements of this were completely out of whack for us. So we realized this wouldn't work. Now, we couldn't use this advertising today because neither Puget Sound nor Southern California are congested at all. Is that a question? No. So we have a new ad, and this is the ad that we introduced just last month. Portland as a gateway. We have the best rail connections in the country. We recognize that this part of America is probably not efficient for us to go after. There's plenty of business here. Let's focus on those places where we have the greatest advantage, where we have a marketing advantage over the ports down here. By the way, Lázaro Cárdenas is just below this part of the map. Prince Rupert is up here above the R someplace, so you can see the kind of distances involved. Now, this is not accurate. The train doesn't go quite up so close to the Canadian border. And while the track does go through Salt Lake City, there are other routes that go slightly north of that. So we're going to focus our attention on this upper, let's say 35 or 40% of the geographical division of America, and focus on those places where we know that because of the closeness of Portland to Asia, again, you can see the difference if you come straight down this line, right? That's the line of latitude, that we're closer to the Far East. Thus, the transit time from China, Shanghai to Chicago via Portland is probably 2 days faster. That's a big deal to Walmart or one of those big companies that have huge distribution centers. So we're changing the way we approach our marketing to both the shipping companies and to the shipping line customers, because the port has a role with those companies as well. So, for example, IKEA has announced that there's going to be a store in Portland in 2007. It's going to be out in Rivergate near the airport, not in Rivergate, but out near the airport. And it's going to be almost 400,000 square feet. That's a big store. But they're also talking about building a distribution center someplace in the Pacific Northwest. So we're now combining the available land and the relatively lower cost of land here in Portland in comparison to Puget Sound or Southern California, and saying, hey, don't just build a store here, build a distribution center as well. Will they do it? We don't actually know, but we're having that conversation. Lots of companies are looking at the efficiencies inherent in using the P&W for the combination of stores, distribution centers, accessibility to rail, accessibility to the highway system, and the availability of container service. We're about to get 2 new shipping lines in here. Yangming from Taiwan will probably be here in June. Zim Container Service, which is based in Israel, is going to bring a service to Portland around the same time, and will introduce a whole new range of ports that Portland has never seen direct service to. They'll go to places like Singapore, where we've never had direct service, to Colombo and Sri Lanka, and will then go through the Suez Canal to the eastern part of the Mediterranean. Big markets there, both on the import side and on the export side for our food products. Another interesting statistic for you. In 2005, this is U.S. and Oregon agricultural statistics, in 2005, for the first time since colonial days in America, the value of America's food imports exceeded the value of America's food exports. In 2005, we were a net importer of food. Think about that for just a second. Okay? I'm off to Japan next week to the world's largest food conference. 100,000 people and 3,000 exhibitors at a gigantic convention center in Tokyo to find out who all these food manufacturers in Asia are and who's shipping all this stuff to the United States. And we're going to get them to bring that stuff through Portland, or at least we're going to give it a shot anyhow. Okay? I'm done, but I'm happy to answer any other questions that you guys may have. Yes.
Do you do any marketing to any export customers?
Oh,
that would-
absolutely.
that
We
would come this
definitely
way?
do.
Like
We
Chicago
definitely
and all
do. Well, we don't do much marketing to the exporters in Asia because of the pattern of how the products that are imported and exported are controlled. We in this country are really big into control. And the way you control shipments in this business is by the terms of sale under which contracts are made between the buyer and the seller. That translates as follows. Our importers like to control the movement of their cargo from Asia, and so they typically buy under terms that are described as FOB. And I don't know necessarily the level of detail that any of you know. FOB means free on board, which means that when I'm here in America and I'm buying something from you in Asia, I buy it, you deliver it to the port, and then I begin to pay for all the transportation from that point. Okay? When our exporters sell, they tend to sell on what's called a C&F basis. C&F stands for cost and freight. So when I sell something to somebody in Asia, my price to the importer in Asia includes the cost of the merchandise and the cost of the freight. So I determine what shipping company is used and what the routing of that cargo will be. American exporters tend to sell that way with them in control. American importers tend to buy on the FOB terms, once again with them in control. So almost all of our marketing to the importer or exporter universe is to companies here in the USA. Okay, now, our conversation with shipping companies is a whole other story. There are no American shipping companies to talk to. So we have to travel literally all over the world, and my colleagues and I are doing that all the time. A couple of my colleagues just made a trip around the world. They were in Taiwan talking to a Taiwanese company. They were in China talking to 2 Chinese shipping lines. They went to Germany to talk to a German shipping company and to France to talk to a French shipping company. They could just as easily have gone to 6 or 8 other countries, but that'll have to wait for another one of their trips. Yes.
Is it, as far as you're talking about like channel size, as far as the depth?
Yes.
How does Portland compare to like Coos Bay, for instance?
I have absolutely no idea what the channel depth in Coos Bay is, but in the case of Coos Bay, it's a whole other set of issues. There's been lots of talk of why are we deepening the Columbia Channel when we could build a port in Astoria. Well, I guess we could, but think of, did you all study economics? And do you know David Ricardo and the law of comparative advantage? If the person in the city is the best doctor and also the best typist, that person could probably do typing or doctoring, but you make more money doing doctoring than typing. Same thing with Astoria. Could we build the port in Astoria? They wouldn't have to come up the river. We wouldn't have to deepen the Columbia Channel. Sounds like a great idea. The problem is, to start from scratch in Astoria would cost several $1 billion, number one, to build the port itself. Number two, there's no railroad connections in Astoria, so the railroads, which are reluctant enough to invest capital in places that are already established, would have to start from scratch. And there's no interstate highway system in Astoria, so that would have to be built at a cost of additional multiple billions of dollars. It ain't going to happen. The money to invest is just not going to be there. Yes, ma'am.
Now, I understand some railroad congestion crossing the river
Yes.
there already. So do we need to increase rail capacity? Sounds like you say we have plenty already.
Well, rail capacity is, once again, a complicated issue. There are no, if only there were simple issues in this business. It actually wouldn't be nearly as interesting if the issues were simple. It's far more interesting because they're complicated. I've told the boys many times over the years that I've made a fabulous career out of the fact that I'm in an extraordinary complicated business where things are always going wrong, which is fantastic. That chaotic state is perfect for people like me. The answer is, once again, yes and no. The railroads right now are sitting in the catbird seat in this business. There's plenty of shipping capacity. There's plenty of highway capacity, although we have a shortage of truck drivers. That's a whole other story. The rail situation, however, is different. The rail bottleneck is really the fundamental weak link in the chain right now. There's not enough capacity on the rails. There's congestion in some places, but not enough service in other places. Here in Portland, there's plenty of capacity, but not enough rail service. Railroads run trains on schedules, and we do not have enough schedules here in Portland. We have plenty of schedules for the movement of cars, eastbound for the imports, coming west from the Midwest of our domestic cars, but we don't have enough schedules to move the containers that we'd like to see through here. So we are not only negotiating with shipping companies, we're negotiating with the railroads to add capacity. That means engines, that means crews, and that means schedules. Now, crews. Why are the crews an issue? In this country, the railroads operate under a set of rules that are probably more appropriate for the way things were 100 years ago. Crew moves 200 miles, and then train stops, and the crew changes. Period. That's it. 200 miles, and then you have to change crews. We need to go. That means there's a crew change between Puget Sound and Portland. Okay? There's not enough crews. So once again, a very complicated situation. The railroad is the primary blockage in the supply chain these days. Sir, in the back.
I was wondering, 'cause you talk about being more competitive with other ports and
Yes.
and attracting more shipping companies, but I was just wondering what the motivations for doing that. What kind of set of goals you guys are working off of?
Well, I guess it's a kind of fundamental concept of business that you have two choices. You can stay where you are, which essentially means you contract, or you can expand your business. Because if you don't grow, by definition, you get smaller because everything around you is growing. So in relative terms, you get smaller if you don't do anything to grow your business, regardless of what business you're in. In our business, which is growing very fast, because as a country, we're becoming increasingly dependent upon imports. I would suggest to all of you that the next time you go shopping anywhere, that's whether you go to Foot Locker, whether you go to Nordstrom, or whether you go to Fred Meyer, before you buy whatever it is you decide to buy, just go on a trip. I literally mean a trip around the world by looking at the labels of everything in the store and see where all that stuff is manufactured. It's manufactured everywhere, probably in some places you may not even ever have heard of before. That's the way business is going. We are now totally interdependent on the rest of the world for the stuff that we want. And we have an absolutely insatiable appetite in this country for stuff. Doesn't matter what that stuff is. I mean, all our wheat is going to Asia so that all you students can eat ramen noodles all the time. I assume that's your diet, same as it is these guys' diet. That's what's happening. So we as an organization have a mission as a public agency here in the state of Oregon to serve our marketplace. And if there are companies here who desire to do business internationally, then we have the obligation to serve them as best we can, and that means we're going to have no choice but to expand our services. Yes?
What about the issue of peak oil and how
The issue of
peak oil,
peak oil?
running out of oil,
Oh, running out of oil.
the possibility of running out of oil?
The certainty of running out of oil.
How is the port and what are the
Well, I'm
discussions
going to be 59 next month, and we're not going to run out of oil while I have to worry about it. So that's you guys' problem. No, I don't mean to be facetious about it. It is an issue. It is one of the factors in this business. As ships get bigger, they become more efficient. More cargo can be moved using smaller amounts of oil per unit of movement. It turns out that ships actually use the lowest possible grade of petroleum products. It's called bunker fuel. It's kind of dirty oil, but they have ways of keeping it clean, so it's relatively non-polluting. Ports are beginning to go to something called cold ironing, which means that the ship's engines get turned off while the ship is in port, which is much less polluting and uses a lot less fuel. Once ships are on the high seas, they actually turn out to be, these days, modern ones, pretty efficient. All of that having been said, there is right now no real alternative for international trade other than using petroleum products for ships to move back and forth. And frankly speaking, I have absolutely not the slightest idea what the solution is going to be, but like I say, that's going to be you guys' problem.
Well, if, for instance, how many of the ships are actually run off a diesel product? Because I know up in the Portland market they're starting to manufacture more and more biodiesel, and that can be almost used as an export.
Well, you know what? I actually can't answer that question because I don't know. Okay, I assume that ships are going to be able to use different types of fuels, but right now they're all using bunker fuel and varieties of different diesel products. As far as I know, there are no ships using biodiesel at all, not on the international stage. Yes?
You're saying that we're taking a huge paradigm shift of being an importing, nation. What do you
Yes.
think that affects our economy? You think it's going to be bad, or do you think it's going to be good for our economy as a whole?
I think it is what it is. Okay. We used to be the world's largest manufacturer of footwear. People in this country no longer want to do those kind of jobs. So should we do something to get people back into the business of making shoes when they don't want to do that? I think that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, there are efficiencies at work here that are much bigger than anything that this country makes those decisions. And besides which, we are a country that has chosen, for whatever reason, good or bad, not to have a national industrial policy of any sort. I suspect that probably is not a very good thing. I'm also not sure that there's any possible way now, because we've probably gone way beyond the point of no return, to reduce the consumerism of this country. It's just not going to happen. It sounds really good, but it's kind of utopian, and it's great, and I studied that stuff in college too, but we're past the point where that's even practical. What that means is we will continue to buy those things that we're less efficient at making, and we're going to continue to manufacture those things where we're more efficient at making, which means General Motors is probably going to go bankrupt. That's probably good. Toyota is better at making cars than we are, and so let them make the cars and we won't. We'll just drive them. Is that good for our economy or bad? Well, it depends on how efficient we are at converting those heavy industry jobs into less heavy industry jobs. If we're at a state right now where unemployment in this country is hovering around 5%, apparently we're doing a pretty good job of doing that. So as long as that continues to work, I'd say let it continue. I'm a free trader. I think, in general, this is working okay. I've traveled overseas a lot in the last 15 or 20 years. And I used to read all the stories in the newspaper about all the exploitation that Nike was doing in the factories in Indonesia. I got news for you. That's not true. Those people in the factories in Indonesia actually are doing better today than they were doing before. Footwear is a basic and fundamental industry no matter where you go in the world. Countries are going to make shoes, and countries are going to make textiles. Another fundamental, easy, low capital intensive industry. If we choose not to make those things in this country, we still want shoes and clothes. Somebody's going to make them for us, and it's better for us to send our dollars to them so they can A, have jobs, B, have shoes, C, have clothes, than it is for us to try to do something that we don't do very efficiently anymore. That's not logical. Now, should we worry about the balance of trade? Yes, we should. Because what it means is the balance of trade by itself is not a big deal. We don't actually owe anybody any money. We just buy more stuff than we sell. What it means is, in the long run, is people are holding assets in dollars overseas. And if they decide they don't like us very much and want to cash in those assets, then we might have a problem. So you're on the right track, but here's a much bigger problem. And it's illustrated by this business with Dubai Ports World that's got everybody in such a tizzy these days. Okay? Once again, a tempest in a teapot. It has to do with the fact that the people that you are responsible to elect to run your local, state, and federal government are not paying any attention to this. You, as a voter, are not paying attention to those issues, and therefore your politicians are not paying attention to those issues. And so we end up getting the government that we deserve. So if you're worried about those issues on the broad scale of the policy of this country, make sure you elect people who understand what's going on, because I got news for you. They don't get it. I've testified in Washington a few times about all this stuff. They don't have a clue. That's not their responsibility. That's your responsibility because you elect them. Yes?
I'd actually be more concerned about the fact that we're not exporting more food than we import. I think that's something that has made our country powerful in the world. People need food. We're not producing anything that people really need anymore. And that ultimately is going to put us in a weak position.
I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I agree with you. We're still producing a lot of raw materials for food. What we're bringing in is processed food. We could be easily self-sufficient in food if we chose to do so. It would be a very simple matter, more so in this country than anywhere else, to be 100% self-sufficient in food, but we're choosing not to do it. It means we could go back to doing it again if we wanted to.
Right, we used to be.
Well, we still are. It's just that we've chosen to let people make stuff that we want. Remember, a lot of that food that we're importing is for variety. We've become a multi-ethnic society in this country. I don't know about you, but I like going to restaurants that have kind of food that I don't eat at home. That's important to me. I think that's a fantastic part of my life. I travel to these places. I like to have access to that food when I get here. It's not going to be easy to get it if we don't import it. That's a large part of what's happening. We're not necessarily importing a huge amount of stuff that we get normally or stuff that we didn't get before. We don't grow pineapple in Hawaii anymore, so we get it from Vietnam and the Philippines. Our fishermen are not that interested in catching tuna, and so we get our canned tuna from some of those very same places. I think that's perfectly okay. I don't think it's a problem for us. Sir, in the back.
To get back a little bit to the import-export
Yes.
issue, it seems to me we've lost our manufacturing jobs. They're being replaced with other jobs. The unemployment rate doesn't look too bad, but the other jobs are service sector jobs that pay a lot less to the American worker, and therefore they have less disposable income to buy other things. You lace that with the fact that our government just recently classified fast foods as a manufacturing job. So we are now to believe when we manufacture a hamburger, that's the same thing as manufacturing a truck. It just blows my mind. What's your take on this?
Well, you got to separate the politics from the economics because they're not the same. That's the first thing. Okay, and don't please come to me for easy solutions because I've already told you that there aren't any. Okay, yes, we have converted a lot of manufacturing jobs for service sector jobs, but you know what? For 35 years, I've been in the service sector. I'm doing reasonably okay. There's lots of good, really good, excellent service sector jobs. By the way, our webmaster told me to let you guys know that we're looking for a web developer at the Port of Portland. So please check our website if anybody's interested.
We can't find people to manufacture products.
And we still have lots of people that manufacture products. You're absolutely right. You know, we may not have General Motors anymore, but Toyota is opening more and more plants. So far fewer of those manufacturing jobs are actually going overseas than most people think they are. They just may not be inefficient American companies who are doing it. We're getting lazy here. There's a lot of stuff we don't like to do anymore. We'd rather have other people do it for us. Okay, those guys who are working in those Toyota factories in Kentucky are doing damn well. They may not have a union to protect them, but look at what trouble that Detroit's got into when it now costs $2,000 in benefits to build a car. Toyota seems to have found a way. I don't think the guys working for Toyota are complaining that they don't have good jobs or they don't have good benefits. A lot of what we've done just hasn't made sense. We haven't thought about it. We've just kind of knee-jerk done it. And I think that's the primary problem. Listen, I can't imagine living any other place than here. But we are just plain lazy in this country. We have no idea how good we've got it. We complain that we pay too much taxes. There is no developed country in the world that people pay less taxes than we do here in the United States. Nowhere, not anywhere. My wife and I lived in England for 2 years, a hugely successful country. The top tax bracket in Britain is exactly the same as the top tax bracket here in America, between 36 and 40%. I actually don't know anybody who pays the top tax bracket here in America. I mean, I know of people who do, but I don't have any close friends who do, because you need to make a lot of money, more than you make working in a public agency. In Britain, you hit that top tax bracket when you make about $50,000 a year. Now, we can't complain about that. On top of that, you pay 17.5% VAT on everything you buy, including a doctor visit. You pay $6 a gallon for gasoline. Okay? We have no idea what economic pain is in the United States. And we should simply stop whining. Or get some cheese with the wine. That's the other alternative. Yes, sir. Something else to import. By the way, we're about to start exporting pizza cheese to China. They really like pizza over there, but they don't know how to make cheese. Yes.
If there was one single factor that you would say was the most important in improving the efficiency of the Port of Portland, what would it be?
Oh, boy. One single... It's funny. Have you been listening in on our meetings these last couple of days? We've just been having this conversation. We have to stop behaving like we live in Portland. We're not thinking big enough here. We're talking about expanding the capacity of T6 from the present 500,000 containers to maybe 600,000 or 700,000 containers. We need to look at what it would take to improve the capacity, increase the capacity of Terminal 6 from 500,000 containers to 3 million containers. How much money would it take? Where would that come from? What different methods would we have to use in order to perform the work? where would we find the labor to do the work, because we have a monopoly situation with the union. The International Longshore and Warehouse Union have a monopoly here on the West Coast to actually load and unload the vessels. That's not going to go away. This is a great place. I wouldn't like it to see it turn into Southern California or Puget Sound, but again, as I said to the gentleman in the back, we either grow or we shrink. I think we need to grow. We need to be careful how we do it to preserve those things about Portland that we like, but we need to think bigger. We don't think big in this place. We don't think big in Oregon. We don't think big in Portland, and I think that's a problem. I think the two can coexist, and I think that's the biggest problem. We have a tendency to be, dare I say it, a bit provincial here, and I think that's not long-term very healthy for us. That would be my answer to you. It's the answer I gave my colleagues at the port, too. Yes, ma'am.
I was just curious, how many ships can you accommodate at a time for loading and unloading at the port?
Well, that's a bigger question. If we're talking only Terminal 6 at the container facility, right now we can handle 3 ships at a time, but they have to be different sizes. We can handle only 1 of these post-Panamax ships at a time because we only have 3 cranes that can handle that ship. We're about to have a 4th crane, and so we work a little bit slower so we can handle 2, each with 2 cranes instead of 1 with 3 cranes. And then 1 could go at the far western end where we have those smaller cranes that can handle those smaller ships. That's why we're in the process of adding craneage to the port. We want to be able to handle 2 post-Panamax ships with 3 cranes and eventually 3 post-Panamax ships with 3 cranes each, but that's some years away. The grain facilities, the other facilities, can work completely independently of what happens at Terminal 6, which is the container facility.
So what is the average turnaround time for the ship?
Again, averages. Everyone's so keen on averages. It depends on how large the ship is and how many containers are loaded on it. The ships that we have here at T6 typically come in on a Sunday morning and leave by Monday morning, about 24-hour turnaround time. The grain ships, the urea ships, the various other types of ships, anywhere from a day to 3 or 4 days, depending upon how much they're taking and where they're going. Yes?
Now, is there going to be any more development to Hayden Island? I heard at one point they talking about those.
Maybe. Hayden Island is an environmentally sensitive place. The port has as its mission protecting the environment. One of the second or third largest department at the Port of Portland is our Environmental Services Department. Amongst ports in the world, Portland is recognized as one of the absolute leaders in in our sensitivity to the environment and the projects that we use to manage our activities. So the answer is yes, but Hayden Island, the west part of Hayden Island, is property owned by the Port of Portland. It is environmentally sensitive. It is developable, but only under certain conditions, and those conditions haven't been met yet. So right now, there are no plans to do anything there. We do own some land out in Troutdale by the old Reynolds aluminum plant, a few hundred acres. There's lots we'd like to do, but politically that's now not possible because the folks out in Troutdale believe that it's a high-tech or a medical facility or pharmaceuticals. I don't think that's very likely, but until they get over themselves, that's not going to happen either. Well, that's up to you. I can't imagine why anybody would bother, but, that's just me. That's how Dennis Miller does it. He always gets a laugh. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. This has been delightful. I'm very pleased you invited me, and I hope you enjoyed this. It was great fun for me. Thank you.